All right, everyone. Hello. We are recording, and Dr. AP Canavan is back on my channel. I am so happy to say. And we are back for our series on archetypes. This is going to be part 5. So, part 5 is, I think, yeah, you gave me
Yeah,
a funny look
yeah,
there.
we're on part 5. I can count.
We can count. We're Englishy humanities types. At least you can do that on one hand, right? So we can do that. So yes, part 5 of our series on archetypes. And we are going to be today talking about the innocent and the creator, as well as their inverse archetypes, if you will. So, AP, how are you today?
I am doing very, very well. Dr. Chase, always good to see you. And how are you doing today?
I am doing really, really well and happy to be here for another one of our series. This series is a lot of fun, actually, because I feel like we are able to raise a few good examples. And then what happens is our viewers inevitably have given us lots of other ones, often even better ones, and sort of continuing the conversation. As you said in a comment on one of our videos, this is like we're starting a little conversation, and hopefully this is getting thoughts going in lots of people's minds as they ponder these various archetypes that we're talking about. So we do have some
And
interesting ones today as well, I think.
I did want, I'm going to take just a second here to brag.
Okay.
I got this in the post today,
Ooh.
and it's a signed copy, and I'm very happy.
Aw, I'm happy for you, actually. That's wonderful. Yeah. And I'm very much looking forward to reading that book and talking about it with you later this year, I think. So, yeah, this
Well,
is
we'll try and squeeze that in. But yeah, my copy of The God Is Not Willing arrived because I'd ordered it from Monroe's in Canada,
yeah,
and shipping costs, yikes. But it's a signed copy, and it's just nice to have.
yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Well, we will look forward to that. But for now, we have some examples. But first, I think some general comments about the innocent. And when we get to the creator, we'll make some general comments there as well. Do you
Okay, do you
have
want me to
that?
put the do you want me to put
Yeah,
that diagram back up?
let's put the diagram up for everybody so they can see that the innocent, according to the diagram that we've been using, is paired with the victim. And that will be up shortly. And the
There we go.
coin that we're calling it a coin, but the coin that divides the innocent and the victim is safety. So that's what the quality that this archetype is based on. And any general remarks before we bring up our examples of innocent slash victim?
Well, this is one that I kind of struggle with as a concept, because again, like, we're while we started with the Jungian basis of a lot of this thing, like this is where these things were taken from.
Yeah.
Obviously, not all archetypes get used to the same extent, the same way in literature, and innocent is not one that I have come across as much. But for me, the innocent typically is one of the characters, and we see this. And this is what I'm trying to articulate. We see this more as not a character that remains constantly as the innocent, but as part of their journey toward being something else.
Yeah.
So, like in a Bildungsroman, the character at the beginning being innocent, starting off in the Shire or starting off in the small village somewhere. And when they go on their adventure, they start as the innocent, but by the end, while they have lost their innocence, they have gained an experience. They've become something else, something more.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, a lot of the time, the innocent is quite often an initial signifier that is used for a character, and
Mm-hmm.
they grow out of it. Now, that's not to say that you can't have characters that remain innocent, or that it always has to be a young character.
Right.
But I think quite often we see this being used as a signifier or a point of connection to youth, to inexperience, to that pure goodness of someone who has no guile, who has no evil to them. And
Right.
that is something that is worth protecting.
Yeah.
That is someone who we want to wrap our arms around and go, they're not bad. They need to be protected from this evil world that we're in.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. So that journey that you're referring to is often, but not necessarily, a part of the archetype of the innocent. Excellent. So, and I will warn our viewers now, we are going to have examples, which means we will have some vague spoilers. And here are the books or series that we're going to include here. We're going to talk about Lord of the Rings. It's a good one. We like to include it because most people have know what happens in Lord of the Rings, so we don't spoil anyone that way. But also we're going to do the Malazan series, the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Specifically, we will discuss characters from books 6 and 7, the Bone Hunters and Reaper's Gale. But again, we're going to keep these spoilers very vague, and we're going to try not to be too specific. And we're certainly not going to get into big spoilers. And also, we're going to take an example from the Harry Potter series. And finally, from the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. So those are the series that we're going to be using today. And we will try to keep our spoilers vague, but giving you some interesting, we think, examples of the innocent, and then later the creator. So let's start with the first example of the innocent, and we'll go with Lord of the Rings here. And we mentioned him once before, and that when we talked a little bit about, I think it was when we talked about tricksters or something of that nature. But I think you were right back then when you said that Pippin, the Hobbit, fits more as the innocent, and because of where he starts, the role he plays among the party, and the journey he takes, because he does, as you said, this is an innocent who does, in a sense, do some growing. Literally, when he drinks from the Ent juice or whatever it's called,
The
right?
end drafts.
Yeah. And also metaphorically, he grows when they return to the Shire. He plays an almost heroic role among the hobbits there. So, but Pippin is a great character. He's beloved by many readers because of his antics and because of he's a naive character, and we see him certainly in his interactions with Gandalf, a certain impatience from Gandalf for Pippin's antics at times, right?
Yeah, and it's like the scene in Moria where he is looking down. There's a big hole. I wonder what happens if I drop a stone down it. I wonder how far down this goes. And Pippin, we're sneaking through an abandoned dwarven stronghold that has like bad things have happened. Why are you making noise? We're you idiot, you fool of a took. And but you can see that it's an innocence. He's not doing anything deliberately wrong. It's just, it's the curiosity of that. And that's what I find the innocent a very difficult one to sort of conceptualize, because I think when we talk about these characters, quite often it's focusing on youth and naivety. Mm-hmm. And it possibly goes quite a bit further than that. So I'm actually looking forward to examples that people come up with in the comments, because this is one that I struggle with.
Okay, good. Well, I think Pippin is nevertheless a very good example, and he's somebody we do enjoy following along and seeing his growth as he has to go out and leave the comfort of the initial party, and he sort of makes his own way and does some heroic deeds there in Minas Tirith. During the siege and so forth, and the role that he plays in helping to save Faramir, for example. So he becomes a character who grows and becomes, has his own initiative. I think it's fair to say. So he's a fun one. Another one that I have just been reading, because I am now reading Reaper's Gale about halfway through, and I believe you might be reading it as well, is the character Beak. And this is, of course, from the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Beak is a really interesting one. And without giving major spoilers away, I think we have to describe his character a little bit here. The first thing I thought when I encountered this character is that he's a character who's in his probably early to mid 30s, and he is obviously on the spectrum. There is no doubt in my mind that he is somewhere on the spectrum. and that he is somebody who is in his innocence, doesn't have he thinks of himself as having no friends. He's a loner. He has a very difficult time relating to other people and understanding social cues and that sort of thing. And so he's a character that, for me, in that innocence, that vulnerability, that loneliness, made me like him actually right away. It was a character that I think that a lot of readers feel invested in. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and it is part of that when you see someone who is without guile, when you see someone who is just so open and honest about things
Yeah.
that you want to protect them. You want to make sure that that pureness, that it is protected and goes unsullied. It's a drive in all of us, and I think anyone who has had children or has nephews and nieces, when you see them and they're that young and they just have that joyous look at the world is amazing and you want to hold them and protect them, I think a lot of it ties into that maternal paternal instinct
Hmm.
that we have. And I think we see that no matter what age the Beak is, we see an element of that we want to protect him because he is good. He wants love and wants to be loved, and we all can identify with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So he has suffered some pretty awful trauma, and it's fair to say that the family dynamic was a very dysfunctional one, and what he emerged from, without getting too specific there. But somehow he has emerged from that, as you say, still innocent and without any without any malice whatsoever. And it's interesting because he's a mage as well, and he's a very powerful character in some respects. So, and that may be part of what makes people uneasy around him. It's interesting that his vulnerability invites other characters to feel for him and yet also feel uncomfortable around him. It's a sort of a paradox, isn't it? That that simultaneous feeling drawn to the character because you want to help or you want to give him a pat on the back, or but also feeling in some sense a bit repulsed, even perhaps, at the same time. Maybe that's too strong a word, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, I think when we encounter uh people who don't react the way that we expect reactions, who
Mhm.
are not neurotypical, there can be difficulty because people don't know how to take you. If
Yeah.
if, if you don't act in the way that they're expecting, people can react to you a bit differently, and it's very hard to adapt to that. To try and model your behavior in such a way that you can sort of pass for neurotypical,
Yeah.
and you learn techniques to to get by,
Sure.
and you learn behaviors to try and sort of fit in. But it that uneasiness where you're singled out as the one that's being different um can be difficult from that perspective, but I can
Mhm.
understand it from the other side as well, where people uh get uncomfortable when the expected reactions and the expected signs and signifiers aren't being reciprocated,
Yeah.
and that makes them uneasy. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't go so far as you did with that. I think maybe uneasy or
Yeah.
not at ease,
Yeah.
even softer than that. But it's that where something is just, to their mind, not quite right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you have that, it's like a tiny little stone in your shoe,
Yeah.
and it can be difficult for people.
Sure. Yeah. As it is for the character Beak, for sure. I think that his power adds an extra element of the unease that people feel around him. So it's not just about the him not getting the social cues in this case. So yeah.
Yeah, and let's be honest. If we think in the Malazan world, the number of mages that we've seen, that you go, mages are a little crazy,
Yeah.
and you know, if they have the ability to turn you to ash in basically a single instant, sometimes you do step a bit neatly around them. You walk on a couple of eggshells there so you don't get exploded. Much the same way that you treat the sappers.
Yes. Oh yeah. This who are, even if anyone's crazier than mages, it's got to be the sappers, right? So yeah. All right. Well, our third example of the innocent then is going to be none other than Ginny from the Harry Potter series, and particularly early Ginny. So Chamber of Secrets Ginny, I think, is probably really the sweet spot that we're talking about here. Because this is a character like Pippin who does grow and come into her own and become her own person in many respects. But she does play the role of the innocent, certainly to Harry Potter's hero, I think, early in the series, particularly in the second book, Chamber of Secrets, right?
Yeah, and again, we were talking about this sort of dichotomy between innocent and victim, and I think one of the strange things is quite often innocents in text, I think, end up as the damsel in distress, or the person who constantly needs rescued.
Yeah.
And I think victim here is actually slightly different. I think victim is someone who plays a victim, who deliberately puts themselves in that role because they want the attention, whereas an innocent isn't doing that. They may end up in that position. So again, a narrative perspective can play a lot in this. But the reason I think Ginny is an interesting example is from Harry's perspective and from Ron's perspective, she is viewed as the innocent, at least obviously initially. She's viewed as the innocent, as someone who needs protecting. But I think if you were in Ginny's perspective, that would never ever come across, because she never sees herself as someone who needs the protection. She is the hero of her own story. And I think that's what happens quite often when we see this progression of the innocent, is they move from being a character that needs protection to assuming and controlling a lot more of their own agency, a lot more of their own power and their direction, and becoming more proactive in their own narrative rather than being part of someone else's.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So the definition you gave, which I think is great, when we're talking about victim, not innocent, but the shadow archetype, the opposite side of the coin from innocent being the victim. That definition depends on the distinction that you made earlier. So the good archetypes versus the shadow archetypes. In one of our previous videos, I think you explained it really well when you discussed how the good archetypes are those who take other people into account, who try to help others, etc. Whereas the shadow archetypes are those who are all about themselves, who are self-centered and do things in order to serve themselves. And so victim, the way you explained it, fits perfectly with that, because of course the victim being somebody who plays the victim, who wants the attention, who uses that to manipulate other people. So I think that's a very great distinction that you made there.
And I think there's a really good example of that in Deadhouse Gates. And without going into spoilers or anything, but the nobles in the Chain of Dogs, and the nobles are all, oh, woe is me. Look at these terrible travails that have been foisted upon. My wine is not chilled. Oh, and everyone else is going, are you serious?
Right.
Look around. But what am I meant to do? They are playing victim. They see themselves as these victims that they have been put upon. It is all about themselves. And that is very different to, an innocent, someone being the damsel and needing to be rescued, or being the victim of a plot and needing to be rescued. These characters, these nobles in the Chain of Dogs, are very much, oh, everything is terrible and my life, and you go, it's not in it doesn't have perspective. They see only themselves and what is wrong with their situation as they want it, instead of taking in the bigger picture. And I think that's a distinction about victim that might be useful.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. It's great. It fits very well with the broader discussion on these archetypes as well. So super. So our second one for today is the creator, which is paired. You don't have to bring it back up, but it's.
I'll put it back up again. It's very difficult to see when we're these little tiny people in the corner.
You don't like to be tiny, do you? Sorry. Yes, so we have our second pairing of archetypes, if you will, that we're talking about today are the creator and the destroyer. So, and if you look at the diagram that AP has so helpfully put up again, you, you can see that the coin in this case is innovation. So innovation, the inventor, and I think you commented before we started filming, AP, that this is probably an archetype you see more commonly in sci-fi than in fantasy, but nevertheless, there's some good ones that I think you and I came up with that come from fantasy as well. So let's, do you have any general comments on the creator-destroyer dynamic?
And this is, I think this is fascinating because there's a really good example from real life where you when you think of the Manhattan Project and Oppenheimer, and this whole idea of I am become Shiva and become the destroyer of worlds, using innovation, using expertise and science and understanding of all of these things to create something absolutely amazing that can actually destroy the world.
Yeah.
That you can see how these are two halves of that coin. That when we have these innovations, when we have these leaps forward, there's a dark side to that creative element. Yeah. Every time when we discovered splitting the atom, you think of what we're moving towards, or the creation of nuclear fusion and different things about atomic structure and how that is incorporated into our technology. But it's also more and more powerful weapons.
Yeah.
And in science fiction, in a lot of early SF, we had gadgeteer stories. We had these characters who would solve problems by inventing something on the fly, or they would create a new technology that would fix the problem. World hunger, we've invented weather satellites and hydroponic bays and all of this sort of stuff.
Right.
You got a lot of that in early SF. And we do see elements of this in fantasy as well. And I think an interesting one to talk about first would be an example of the destroyer from The Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
So, Philip, who are we going to use?
Oh, well, I think it's perfect, really, because when you talk about, I mean, this is a very human thing, isn't it? The tendency for us to see ourselves as innovators, as creators, but then we find out that these inventions of ours are actually very destructive. And I think this figure from Lord of the Rings started out believing in himself as a creator, probably. But we, the readers, yeah, I think he thought that he was one of the good guys at first, but then became very utilitarian or practical or whatever. But nevertheless, he's somebody who does love his innovations, and that is Saruman. And his name, by the way, even fits with this whole idea of him as as innovator / destroyer, because Searu in Old English, it's an Old English derived name, means somebody who likes really technical, crafty sort of, it has a very crafty kind of connotation to it. So it fits very well with us putting him in here as the destroyer side of this archetype, who obviously he tears down trees and he destroys the beautiful landscape and all of that. But why does he do it? He does it for the sake of mastery, for himself, right? So he's obviously, there's the big distinguishing thing, as you pointed out so many times. It's about him. It's about enriching himself, about power accumulating to himself. So he's very much a Faustian character, somebody who might have started out admirable, but then crossed that line into a destructive phase where it becomes more about me. And so, yeah, Saruman, perfect.
Yeah, and I think he probably wears a cape a lot of the time.
Oh, come on.
The cape is a signifier. It's a dead giveaway. But when you think of the scarring of the Shire, that sequence in Return of the King is very much about the industrialization. Productivity skyrockets. The mills are more efficient.
Yeah.
But what is the cost? It's the pollution of everything around, and it's so that Saruman can set himself up as Sharky, the person in charge, the boss man.
Yep.
So I think he's a great example of that in in fantasy.
Yeah.
But we had a good example of the creator from the Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Oh yeah, yeah. You came up with that one. I think it's perfect. By
Uh,
the way, you could probably take the graph down now if you want to be big
uh,
again.
I will embiggen myself, will I?
So yeah, no, I think you came up with a great one there. And one of my favorite characters, by the way, as well. I love this character, Samar Dev, and she appears first in the Bone Hunters, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, in and around there.
I think so. And someone will correct me if I'm wrong, no doubt. But so brilliant character. She is an inventor. And just I can't, we're not going to get too specific about her because, again, we're trying not to be too spoilery here. But she is an inventor who wants to benefit humanity with her inventions. She wants to make things that make life better for people. And yet, unlike Saruman, she is aware of the possible repercussions to her inventions. She shows awareness. She thinks ahead. And this is partly in her interactions with another very beloved character in the series who challenges her assumptions. This character that she interacts with a whole bunch in the series, he challenges her assumptions that just inventing stuff is going to be good because it's going to be innovative and it's going to make things better. So her assumptions that civilization equals good and barbarity equals bad get challenged. But she is humble enough, unlike Saruman, to actually consider these challenges to her perspective. So I really love her for that. And because she's just so spunky as well. So,
but again, it's we can see when we talked about this, the sage as wisdom, the magician as intelligence, what we see, I think, with the creator is sometimes applied intelligence, the engineer, that these are all different ways of talking about different types of intelligence and different abilities. And Samar Dev is fantastic. I would disagree about Saruman. I think he was well aware of the repercussions. He just didn't care because he's focused on the self.
Yeah.
Because Samar Dev is, I want to solve this problem and I want to do this thing. But because she has that awareness of others, which is, I think, an integral part of the archetype, that allows her to see and weigh up the ramifications of the inventions and what's going on. So she has intentionality as well as tries to work out unintended consequences and ramifications. She considers others. Saruman knew that it was going to pollute the air, knew that it was going to pollute the streams, knew that it was going to make people's lives miserable, but he didn't care because it got him power. It got him the thing that he wanted. Right. So I don't think that Saruman was unaware. I just think he was a git who liked wearing capes.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that he was unaware. In fact, I think that he started out like Gandalf. And we're getting into Lord of the Rings lore here a bit because they were sent to look after humanity. And I believe that Saruman started out as essentially good, but at some point during his thousands of years of existence, drifted more and more, just as I said, like a Faustian character, and who was admirable at first and did things, saved lives. Saruman was that way too. He actually did a lot of good before he started drifting more and more toward this selfishness and quest for power and so forth. So by the time we meet him in Lord of the Rings, he clearly knows the consequences of what he's going to do and doesn't care because, as you said, he's a git.
Yeah, and the cape obviously went to his head. But moving on to
cape.
moving on to the Stormlight Archive, because there's brilliant examples of this in both Yasna and her mother Navani.
Yes. Yeah.
Brilliant aspects of this: the scholar, the inventor, looking at a problem and trying to solve it. And we can see in the Stormlight Archive, both these female characters have sharp intellects, but it is applied intelligence. It's not being an academic for the sake of being an academic. It's not being elitist and using that information to further oneself and not other people. Yeah. And I think we could safely say that they're not necessarily the wisest of
Hmm.
characters.
True.
But they are brilliant. They are inventors. They are focused on, here's a problem. How do I solve it? How do I take what I know and build something that will fix this?
Right.
Um,
Yeah, so they are mostly positive, but there is an element of exploitation in what they do when they create the fabrials. And I think for the most part unknowingly, but this is again is a statement about humanity, isn't it? Even when we think we're inventing great things that are going to help, often we step on a few toes along the way, and some of the things we don't even realize we're doing are actually destructive along the way, certain ingredients in some of our inventions. And this is certainly the case in the Stormlight Archive, that when you learn more about how these things work, and you would think that, yeah, they're great because they solve lots of problems and they make life better for people. But as with almost every human invention that does these things, there is a negative side to it. So I think that's something that's important to point out as well. And that's the aspect of the creator destroyer. You can't entirely separate these two things when you're talking about humanity, can you?
and in fact, in Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, where they have these manifestations of abstract ideals in a sort of corporeal form, and one of them is destruction. And there's an ongoing storyline where Destruction gave up his realm and he bums around trying to be an artist of a sort, being a chef, being a sculptor, because he doesn't want to be Destruction anymore. And the fascinating thing about that is, in order to sculpt a block of marble, you have to destroy the block and chip away all of these things to uncover something else. In order to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs.
Yeah.
Destruction and creation are locked in that cycle.
Yeah.
And I think Yasna and Navani are absolutely fascinating because they illustrate so neatly that while we want to sort of go, here is the archetype, this is who they are, when we have them as characters, any of these people that we've discussed, when we have them as characters, we might isolate a moment where they are maybe an articulation of this archetype. But we look at that and then we look at all of the other things surrounding it that don't fit with that, because it puts them in sharp relief. By seeing the things that don't fit with the archetype, we actually highlight those aspects of character, and it allows us to better understand and better dissect and analyze and take apart all of the different character traits, instead of just seeing them as just this one thing. Yeah. And that is why I like looking at archetypes, looking at these traits, because always it's part of that analytical process of finding something, isolating it, and then moving on.
Yeah, and that, my phremesis, is what the series is all about. So yes, brilliant stuff. So, well, anything else to add, AP, to this discussion, or shall we move on?
Well, just one last thing. I'm sorry about the cape jokes. I'm not sorry about the cape jokes. It was a pleasure to be here.
Oh, no, I think you're just jealous that I got the cape, but we can talk about that some more. All right.
Thank you for having me on, Philip. This has been great.
Bye-bye. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, my friend.